the agency to continue with its inspections. Mr. Grossi, could you tell us a little more about that? Do you believe that the IAEA is able to carry out detailed inspections, and do you believe that this temporary agreement could lead to a longer-term agreement in the context of the JCPOA? It's fundamental for Iran to come back to full commitment to the joint action plan. Could you tell us what role you would expect from the EU if we are to achieve that? I think they are the priority questions that the Security and Defence Subcommittee is looking at. Of course, I will also give the floor to the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I will give the floor to Ziliana Zovko, who is Vice President of that committee.
Merci, Madame Présidente. Chère Présidente, merci pour...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the comments from the Foreign Affairs Committee. The nuclear agreement with Iran is, we believe, an extremely symbolic multilateral agreement. It's a fundamental part of the global non-proliferation architecture, and it's a cornerstone for peace, security, and stability in the region. It's in the interests of the EU to ensure that this agreement is maintained and is fully implemented. Ambassador, Mr. Grossi, I would also like to emphasize a number of points on nuclear non-proliferation. The AFET Committee supports the role of the IAEA in this domain, and this is covered by your statutes, and we also support you in the work that you're doing in this sector. The common security policy in Europe also sees this as an essential element. Our annual report on the implementation of the JCPOA last year urged greater attention to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in order to protect citizens, but also in order to ensure international security and stability. When I refer to these instruments, I would also like to emphasize the importance of the neighborhood instrument and the international cooperation and the cooperation for nuclear safety. This aims at improving the level of nuclear safety and also in order to ensure effective safety outside of the EU. We are particularly interested in these commitments when it comes to international standards, and that includes the IAEA Convention. Ambassador, I will leave it at that, but I'm extremely interested to hear what you have to say, in particular the Iran agreement, because we have an AFET debate on that tomorrow. Could you also tell us what the situation is when it comes to the North Korean nuclear program, particularly in light of concerning information about production of fissile material and maintenance of nuclear facilities, as well as exchanges with Iran in the field of missiles? Then one final question. How do you see the future of cooperation between the IAEA and the EU? Thank you.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I would also like to congratulate you on your French. It's lovely to hear my mother tongue. I'll try and learn Croatian as quickly as I can. I'll now give the floor to the chair of the Industry Committee, Christian Boussoy.
Je vous remercie beaucoup, Madame la Présidente Loiseau.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this exchange of views with the Ambassador Grossi, and also for inviting ITRE to participate.
Responsible committee in the Parliament for energy, including nuclear safety, decommissioning and waste disposal in the nuclear sector, as well as for the research policy. Nuclear energy represents a critical component in the energy mix of several EU member states, accounting for almost 26% of the electricity produced in the European Union. Well, in the aftermath of the 1986 Chernobyl disaster and 2011 nuclear catastrophe, research and innovation. Research on the civilian uses of nuclear energy is an important function of Euratom. In the area of fusion energy, the European Union is a founding member and main financial partner of ITER, an international nuclear fusion research and engineering project, which is currently building the world's largest experimental nuclear fusion reactor in Cadarache, France. A joint undertaking for ITER and the development of fusion energy has been established in order to promote scientific research and technological development in the field of fusion. So many issues which are very important for ITRE committee in the European Parliament, and of course taking into consideration our competencies over these topics. Once again, we are thanking you for inviting to this meeting, and we are looking forward to this exchange of views with Ambassador Grossi. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Sans plus attendre, et parce qu'il y a beaucoup d'attentes, je passe la parole à l'ambassadeur Grossi pour 15 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un grand plaisir d'être là avec vous et avec les collègues des autres commissions qui sont présents, je crois. Je suis informé du fait qu'apparemment c'est une première, ou deux premières plutôt, parce que je ne pense pas qu'il y ait eu des occasions par le passé où les trois commissions soient siégées avec le DG de la IAEA, et je crois que c'est même la première fois que c'est lui qui tient la responsabilité de cette agence internationale, l'IAEA, c'est présent devant vous. En tout cas, c'est un privilège pour moi. En tout cas, c'est quelque chose que je peux vous dire. C'est, si vous le voulez bien, une chose qui devrait devenir une habitude. Je crois qu'entre l'agence à Vienne et l'Union européenne en général, il n'y a que des choses importantes et des bonnes choses à faire. Et beaucoup à faire dans différents domaines qui ont été évoqués par vous-même dans votre introduction, et aussi les présidents des autres commissions et la vice-présidente qui a pris la parole. Donc, je vais essayer, vu la contrainte de temps qu'on a, d'être assez focalisé. Et en commençant par l'Iran. Vous avez souligné le fait que avec l'Iran, il y a des efforts diplomatiques en cours. Ces efforts diplomatiques en cours se tiennent à deux niveaux, si vous voulez bien. Donc, il y a un niveau qui est celui de ceux qui participent au JCPOA et qui essayent, pour le moment, de trouver une voie pour revenir à cet accord. Et après, il y a tout notre travail. Pour nous, il était important de garder une présence utile en Iran. C'est clair qu'on est la seule et unique présence internationale dans la République islamique, et c'est pour cela que je m'y suis rendu à Téhéran au mois de février et dernièrement aussi au centre de négociation, dans le cadre de négociations ici, dans les marges du Conseil des gouverneurs, qui ont mené finalement à un accord temporaire d'ordre bilatéral et technique qu'on a pu conclure avec l'Iran. Cela était nécessaire vu une échéance qui avait été imposée unilatéralement par l'Iran suite à une loi approuvée par le Majlis, par le Parlement iranien, qui prévoyait beaucoup de choses, plusieurs choses, parmi d'autres une augmentation assez, je dirais, importante dans intensité et dynamisme du programme nucléaire lui-même, dans le domaine d'enrichissement d'uranium et autres, mais aussi, et c'était cela qui nous préoccupait, dans la limitation d'accès à nos inspecteurs. Donc je pensais et il y avait une date butoir, si vous voulez, fixée au 23 février, à partir de laquelle les protocoles additionnels ne seraient plus d'application en Iran, et donc la présence et l'accès de nos inspecteurs en Iran serait fortement limité. C'est ça qui m'a amené à Téhéran. Je me suis entretenu avec mes Zarif et avec d'autres responsables politiques en Iran et techniques, et on a pu je dirais, conclure cet accord minimum qui nous permet d'assurer une présence et d'enregistrer des informations à propos d'un programme qui, chaque jour, devient plus dynamique et qui avance dans plusieurs domaines qui sont et qui étaient, il faut le dire, interdits dans les cadres du JCPOA. Je crois que cela a eu comme résultat positif deux choses. D'un côté, on a pu, comme je viens de le dire, assurer cette présence minimale mais indispensable. Et d'un autre côté, je crois que cela nous a offert une fenêtre d'opportunité diplomatique, qui s'étend à 90 jours, 3 mois, plus ou moins ce que j'ai négocié à Téhéran, en espérant que dans cet espace-là de temps, il sera possible pour les parties concernées à arriver, ou en tout cas entamer un retour au JCPOA. Et si c'est le cas, évidemment, l'agence participera de manière évidemment indispensable. Autrement, j'ai obtenu un accord pour continuer le travail de clarification dans plusieurs domaines qui restent en doute, je dirais, et qui se rapportent aux activités qui auraient eu lieu en Iran dans le passé, mais pour lesquelles des explications techniques crédibles n'ont pas été fournies jusqu'au jour d'aujourd'hui par l'Iran. Donc on va envoyer déjà une mission technique et on commence ce travail. Comme vous pouvez voir, le travail de l'agence, c'est indispensable. Sans l'agence, sans la présence de nos inspecteurs sur le terrain, tout espoir d'un accord crédible est impossible. Donc nous comptons encore et toujours sur les supports indispensables de l'Union européenne et du Parlement européen dans ces négociations-là. Donc peut-être on pourra encore développer la question plus tard. Je passe vite à la question de la Corée du Nord. La Corée du Nord, c'est un problème différent. La Corée du Nord a déjà proliféré, malgré nous, mais elle a déjà proliféré. C'est un pays qui possède illégitimement, mais qui possède quand même des armements nucléaires. Donc là, les retours en Corée du Nord sera difficile car les pays que nos inspecteurs ont laissés en 2009 a beaucoup changé et le programme nucléaire est beaucoup plus vaste. Avant, il était question d'un programme nucléaire nourri des armements à plutonium qui étaient séparés dans les complexes de Yongbyon. Maintenant, c'est un pays qui s'est doté des capacités d'enrichissement énormes avec des installations éparpillées dans tout le territoire du pays. Donc, notre retour en Corée du Nord sera vraiment un énorme défi d'ordre technique et dans la prolifération aussi. Mais nous nous préparons et nous avons un appui conséquent, je dirais, de l'Union européenne en termes de contributions extra-budgétaires qui nous permettent de nous préparer. Il faut, vous savez, pour cela, bien préparer les inspecteurs, c'est fournir des équipements techniques et des informations qui nous donnent déjà une idée assez approchée de la réalité dans ces pays-là. I would like now to address some of the other points that have to do with the cooperation in general with the European Union. Of course, nuclear security, nuclear safety are pillars of this cooperation. I think it's good to note in this year where we are commemorating 10 years after the accident in Fukushima in Japan and 35 years after the accident in Chernobyl that was being recalled by the president just now of the Industry Commission, the IAEA carries out a very important work in the safety of nuclear plants and associated facilities all over the world. By the establishment of safety standards, by the implementation of nuclear safety and nuclear security international arrangements and treaties. So our work there merits and deserves all the support we can get. It's not an easy thing, and in particular, I would say, is a good segue to the next issue which was mentioned, and that has to do with nuclear energy. Of course, we are very much aware of the fact that in the European family there are different views. There are many that benefit from nuclear energy in a very vast manner, I would say, almost half of the countries, and there are some others that don't, and there are political views about it. As head of the global institution for nuclear energy, I must say, I must recall that contrary to certain views, nuclear energy is growing all over the world. It's growing in Asia, it's growing in China, in India, in Russia, in Turkey, even in the Gulf, or in Latin America, where I come from. And it is something that it's important to be recalled in terms of the climate change challenge that we all have in front of us, because we know, and this is not a political opinion, it's a science-based constatation that nuclear energy is a very low emission type of energy, and when we have the big challenges that we have in terms of the decarbonization of our economies, nuclear energy is, as I say, is playing a role. Of course, it is in the freedom of countries to decide whether to continue or not to use it, but it is playing an important role. It is playing a growing role in the world writ large. So this is why we believe that work in this area is so indispensable. And we are ready to work with the European Union and with others in making sure that nuclear energy, wherever it is used, and as I say, it is growing all over the world, it's used in a very safe, secure, and non-proliferation manner. Perhaps I should also say, it hasn't been in your questions, but since I have a couple of minutes, I would like to also recall the important work that is related to the development and promotional aspects of the human and sustainable development goals agenda all over the world. Nuclear techniques and technologies help countries protect their crops, protect their health through nuclear medicine all over the world, in places where radiotherapy is only accessible when the IAEA comes. Otherwise, there is not a single radiotherapy unit. And we do this work. The IAEA is an indispensable player when it comes to fighting, for example, plastic pollution through isotopic tracers, and working with countries, especially in the ASEAN region and in other parts of the world, working in this area. The IAEA is also very present when it comes to fighting pandemics. It may be a surprise for many, but we have been helping close to 130 countries throughout the pandemic by sending RT-PCRs, which, as you know, are a nuclear-derived technique. We are training people, sending tests, and creating capacity building in many countries. And now we have launched an initiative which is called Zodiac for zoonotic disease integrated action, which allows us to continue the work that for many years the IAEA has been carrying out hand in hand with the FAO, with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, again through nuclear-derived techniques in the early identification of pathogens, and in particular zoonotic pathogens that cross the boundaries from the animal to the human world. And we are working with a network of 300 veterinary labs all over the world, in Southeast Asia, in Central Africa, in the Caribbean, on this. And all of these, dear colleagues, Madame la Présidente, are areas where we need the support of the European Union, because the European Union, who has been a steadfast supporter of the IAEA, if I may say so, has been concentrating, of course, and rightly so, and we are very grateful, on non-proliferation, on safety, on security. But there is also all these areas which are totally compatible with the mission, with the noble goals of the EU when it comes to protecting the people, to ensuring access to health for millions in developing countries, protecting their crops through irradiation that avoid harvest from going rot. So all of these things are areas where we have not been working together so much, Madame la Présidente. So my invitation to you, and in my dialogue with our colleagues in the Commission, I'm saying this. The IAEA is much more than meet the eye. And through us, you have a wonderful opportunity to extend the generosity of the European vision to the rest of the world. So at 14 minutes and a half, I stop, so we have more time for questions. Thank you very much. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Et je voudrais saluer votre capacité à traiter d'autant de sujets aussi importants dans le temps imparti, que ce soit une inspiration pour nos collègues qui sont très nombreux à vouloir vous poser des questions et à qui je demanderai la concision lorsqu'ils s'adresseront à vous. Nous allons commencer par les coordonnateurs de la sous-commission Sécurité et Défense. Pour le PPE, je passe la parole à David Lega.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ambassador Grossi, for these introductory remarks. And I would also, like my colleague Ms. Sovko, like to comment on the recent agreement on nuclear inspections between the IAEA and the Iranian regime that you helped negotiate. And as you said, this agreement lays out the framework for the continuation of inspections by the IAEA at facilities that are linked to Iran's nuclear program. And the agreement is tentative and will only last for 2 more months. And as things stand, inspectors are not allowed to make non-announced visits to any of Iran's 6 declared nuclear facilities. They are denied access to sensitive and military sites. They are not even allowed to monitor the 24-hour surveillance cameras at those sites. So, Mr. Ambassador, in your view, why are the Iranians trying to prevent your agency from doing its job? What is there to hide? In fact, your own agency has published 2 important reports recently, both highly critical of Iran's conduct and behavior. Iran has failed to offer credible answers regarding the IAEA's current investigations. And nevertheless, during your recent board meeting, no resolutions were adopted on Iran. So, has the agency in some way decided to downgrade the Iran's NPT commitments in order to save the JCPOA? Thank you.
Merci. Pour les SND, Sven Mixer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director General, for appearing in front of us and for all the great work you and your team are doing. You spoke quite comprehensively about Iran and North Korea, therefore I will not ask about them. I would like to ask 2 questions. First, about the other NPT outliers, particularly those in South Asia. I think that the proliferation threat posed by the AQ Khan network is already starting to recede from public memory, but nonetheless the issue of the outliers remains, and I would like to hear your opinion as to what is the best way to minimize proliferation threats arising from those outliers, short of bringing them into the fold of the NPT as non-nuclear weapon states, which, although it is our eventual goal, obviously, is very unlikely to happen overnight or in any foreseeable future. And the second question has to do with the civilian use of nuclear energy. And you spoke about that towards the end of your presentation, and I think it's a very important issue. A few years ago, there was a very prominent, very visible campaign to eliminate the use of highly enriched uranium in the civilian and scientific reactors. And it was alleged that this material, while it's probably not likely to be used to manufacture devices compact enough to be mounted on missiles, it theoretically at least could be used to manufacture a dirty bomb or even a crude gun-type device. So I would like to hear your opinion as to where we stand in this process, and how satisfied you are with the way the inspections of those sites are being done and run, and is it sufficient to totally eliminate the threat that was considered to be quite prominent just a few years ago?
Merci. Pour Renew Europe, Petras Austrevicius.
Thank you, Chair. Well, indeed, we have noted that after the Iran's parliament passing a law to suspend nuclear inspections, you, Director General, managed to open even a narrow window of opportunity to continue monitoring country's nuclear program. We do acknowledge that this is much less access than under the 2015 nuclear deal, but still, there is such a hope. Do you believe that this even narrower window of opportunity will allow IAEA to monitor the sites as it should be? And will it be enough, to bring enough of evidence of this work? Secondly, so we have to acknowledge that the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the opposition force, is very critical about the Iran's regime. And most recently, on March 2nd this year, they revealed the names of previously undeclared sites near the town of Abadeh in Fars province, southern Iran. It was not yet declared by the Iranian regime. And during the inspection of the site by your agency, inspectors found traces of uranium particles to which the Iranian regime has failed to respond adequately. By this evidence, can we trust the Iranian regime in this regard, and to what extent you see the wish of the Iranian regime to cooperate? And finally, Director General, I have to admit that although nuclear energy is still in a very mix of energy policy of many countries, but example of Belarus, commissioning nuclear power station in Ostrovets, not fulfilling full set of criteria of nuclear safety, raises issues of security of new installation. To what extent your agency is involved and aware of the situation in Ostrovets? Thank you.
Merci. Il n'y a personne pour ID. Je passe la parole pour les Verts à Mounir Satouri.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur l'ambassadeur Grossi. Je voudrais d'abord saluer le travail de l'IAEA concernant le nucléaire iranien, de vérification, mais aussi de diplomatie. Vous avez dernièrement réussi à maintenir un degré de vérification par vos inspecteurs des activités iraniennes satisfaisant, in extremis, et la solution provisoire ainsi obtenue nous permet de prolonger des vérifications essentielles pour 3 mois. Cet accord technique ne sera pas suffisant pour assurer le retour à l'accord du JCPOA. Il faut à tout prix restaurer la confiance politique et raviver cet accord. Les Européens doivent jouer ce rôle de remise en confiance et encourager les États-Unis et l'Iran à revenir autour de la table des négociations sans préconditions. L'IAEA joue dans le domaine de la vérification des activités nucléaires un rôle crucial et je me félicite que ce rôle soit amené à accroître pour maintenir la paix et la sécurité. Récemment, le traité d'interdiction des armes nucléaires est en effet venu renforcer le rôle en posant à ces États parties l'obligation de conclure avec l'IAEA un accord de garantie généralisé et de ne jamais diminuer le niveau de garantie qu'ils ont contracté par le passé avec l'IAEA. Le traité d'interdiction donne aussi un rôle à l'IAEA dans le suivi des matériaux nucléaires des États dotés rejoignant l'interdiction. Monsieur Grossi, un pays nous inquiète en particulier des faits du risque qu'il pose en termes de prolifération des armes nucléaires. Je veux parler ici de l'Arabie Saoudite. Ce pays qui veut développer son nucléaire civil à hauteur de 16 réacteurs d'ici 2040 n'a contracté que les garanties les plus limitées avec votre agence. Il a été révélé en août dernier qu'avec l'aide de la Chine, l'Arabie Saoudite construit un site d'extraction du Yellow Cake. L'ancien directeur adjoint de votre agence a demandé à l'Arabie Saoudite pourquoi aucune transparence n'était faite sur ce programme s'il n'a que des buts d'utilisation civile. Je partage son questionnement. De nombreux élus aux États-Unis sont aussi inquiets. Monsieur Grossi, l'AIEA a-t-elle pu relancer des discussions avec l'Arabie Saoudite pour que Riyad poursuive le protocole additionnel? Je vous remercie.
Merci. Pour ECR, Pietro Fiocchi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador Grossi. Thanks for being here and answering our questions. Number one, I'm interested in the civil use of nuclear energy, but do you see Germany's decision to phase out all nuclear power plants by 2022 as a start in the decrease in all EU of nuclear energy production, but especially as a decrease in the technical supremacy of Europe in this field? I refer to the referendum that we ran in my country, Italy, in '87, which basically killed all the research and development in my country. Second, you already answered, but of course nuclear power I consider very environmentally good. But what do you think of the approach by the Commission on this? Do you think it will be in favor or not? And last, what do you think is the possibility of your agency or of the Commission, European Commission, to impose safety standards in nuclear power plant in neighbors' countries which are very close to our nations, and they are already setting up some nuclear power plants? Thank you very much.
Pour the left, Mick Wallace.
Thanks very much, President. And thanks, Rafael, for your presentation. We don't meet a whole lot of Argentinians in here, so it's good to meet one for a change. Just for a side note, I stepped on the streets of Buenos Aires for a month before, when you were only 12 years of age. And I'm really sorry that you just lost Diego Maradona in November, an amazing individual. You say that diplomatic levels are underway trying to find a way to get back to the JCPOA. There was an Iran delegation meeting yesterday, and a Cornelius Adebar, he's from the Carnegie Europe Institution, he said that Europe is not playing a strong hand in getting JCPOA back on track. I'm just wondering, what do you think of that? In terms of Iran and the role, people are pretty critical of Iran's position on the JCPOA. Would you agree that, given that the US were the ones who left, and it wasn't Iran who left first, do you not think the initiative has to come from the US, and that sanctions will need to be lifted in some form before you can expect to get Iran back to the table? And also, my final point, people are critical now of the restrictions that Iran are putting on your own organisation in terms of inspections and whatever, and in relation to unannounced visits and all that. But would you agree that Iran in the last 10 years has been more transparent than Israel, who we never seem to talk about when it comes to the nuclear power? We know that they have nuclear weapons, but they don't adhere to any of the international rules, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je passe maintenant la parole à l'ambassadeur Grossi pour répondre à cette première série de questions pour 5 minutes.
Voilà, on va essayer. Toutes des questions très pertinentes. For Mr. Lega, he referred to the fact that our inspectors are, of course, limited in their access and they are denied much of their competences. Well, and why he was asking, we believe that this was the case. I think, of course, this is very regrettable, and this is at the root of my effort to address this situation head on. You remember that when Iran unilaterally, its parliament established, as I was mentioning in my opening remarks, established a limitation on our accesses. They said 23rd of February, and then no more additional protocol, no more access through the JCPOA, and that's it. And so my impression is that we were sleepwalking into that situation without doing much. And this is why I invited myself to Iran. I told them I want to come and sit down with you and see what can be done. And I think in the end, we were able to have this agreement, which admittedly is limited, but which allows us to maintain a record of the basic activities that are taking place. Granted, it's not the same as having the whole access that we used to have, but it is an interim, is a transitional agreement, which I hope we can work on the basis of that. The second set of questions came from Mr. Mixer. He was referring to the outliers from the NPT and what could be done short of bringing them to the NPT. I agree with him that bringing them to the NPT would be close to a miracle, but there are lots of things that can be done. And one thing has to do with avoid any proliferation activities stemming from countries that do have the technologies. And for this, I think the work and the presence of the IAEA inspectors is indispensable. Again, I must say that because of the fact that these countries are not signatories to the NPT, we have limited type of safeguards. But we do have some access and lots of informal contacts with their institutions. My impression is that with them and with other countries in the same position, the IAEA must try to be present in as many ways as it can be. You also refer to the reduction of the use of high enriched uranium. This campaign was very typical of the past decade, when you remember there were a series of summits initiated by former President Obama, but that part of high political visibility is done, and now when the lights turn off, it's for us, for the IAEA to continue this work, this daily, I would say, work on nuclear security. I think through the strengthening of nuclear security measures in every country, we have nuclear security infrastructure plans and a number of guidance that we apply all over the world, which is necessary. The amounts of high enriched uranium have been reduced, and I think it's a good thing. For a normal operation of your nuclear reactors, you don't need it. And for research reactors, there is also an active campaign of changing the core of those reactors to low enriched uranium, which is absolutely possible and can be done. Mr. Austrovicius was talking about a little bit, again, coming to the first question of Mr. Lega, to Iran and what we have in Iran. But he was, so I hope my answer to Mr. Lega partially covers his point, but he was asking something in addition, which I believe is very important, when he referred to other issues, other points which are still in doubt. And about which we have been repeatedly asking Iran. Let me say that as part of the political agreements I had a few days ago here in Vienna on the margins of the Board of Governors, we agreed on a specific platform and process to start addressing those issues. They have to do, like you were saying very aptly, with the finding of traces of processed uranium in areas where they shouldn't be. which means that there were undeclared sites and facilities. So what we are trying to do now is to sit down with them. I'm sending a technical group of experts now in beginning of April, and I'm going to be updating the Board of Governors about that. We want to know if those traces are there, why, and if there was nuclear material, where is it now? It's not going to be an easy process, but I must say at least they have agreed to stop a merry-go-round of communications and letters that were being sent with no concrete results, and now at least we have a forum and that we are going to be working with them. You also mentioned Belarus. With Belarus, we have been engaging for a long time. You know that the IAEA has peer review and advisory services, and we have been present there by providing emergency prevention and response services, nuclear infrastructure services, regulatory services, and through peer review. As you know, the peer review services, which are very similar to the ones that exist in the European area through the European network of regulators, and by the way, many of them are carried out by the same experts, have been there. We have found, of course, good practices. We have found things that need improvement, but one thing which is very important, I would like to say, is that we have not found any reason for that plant not to operate. So we are present all the time. I've been engaged with our Lithuanian friends who are, of course, quite concerned about this, and we have been giving them assurances that we are present in the field, and we will continue to be present because, of course, nuclear safety is of the utmost importance. Monsieur Satouri avait posé la question aussi à propos de l'accord technique avec l'Iran. Moi, je crois, j'ai couvert plus ou moins cette question et il demande à quel point les Européens devraient jouer un rôle. Je crois qu'ils sont en train de le jouer. Comme vous savez, il y a un double rôle. Il y a un rôle individuel, pour ainsi dire. Il y a la France, il y a l'Allemagne, et aussi le Royaume-Uni qui n'est plus dans l'Union européenne, mais qui est en Europe quand même. Et aussi le rôle de M. Borrell en tant que coordinateur. Donc je crois qu'il y a là un rôle à jouer. Moi, je consulte très régulièrement avec eux. Et voilà, donc je les encourage dans leurs efforts. Mon travail est un travail d'inspection et technique, donc pour la partie politique, c'est pas ma responsabilité, mais j'essaye de leur donner mon meilleur avis technique à propos de ça. Il parlait du tien, le tien est important, mais comme vous savez, la famille de l'agence est divisée là-dessus. Il y a des pays, je crois que dans l'Union européenne, vous avez aussi plus ou moins la même situation. Donc il y a des pays qui sont des pays dotés, des pays non dotés. Il y a des pays alliés dans le cadre de l'OTAN et qui ont des visions différentes. Je crois que ce qui est important, c'est de soutenir le fait que le désarmement nucléaire est toujours un objectif pour tous. Et qui admet des voies d'accès différents. L'Arabie saoudite, c'est un cas très important. Mais il faut dire que pour l'instant, les activités nucléaires en Arabie saoudite sont très limitées, énormément limitées. Donc, il y a un peu de travail dans le minerai de l'uranium, mais c'est un travail vraiment, je dirais, très peu développé. Donc, les schémas d'inspection qu'on a en place en ces moments, je dirais, je répète, en ces moments, en Arabie saoudite est suffisant parce que la quantité de matériel nucléaire qui existe dans les royaumes est très limitée. Bien évidemment, les moments venus où la quantité et la densité de l'activité nucléaire là-bas sera plus grande, c'est clair que notre présence en termes d'inspection et des aspirations d'inspection seront beaucoup plus grandes. Et je n'envisage pas une situation dans laquelle on aurait des installations nucléaires qui fonctionneraient sans la présence des inspecteurs nucléaires de l'AIEA. Donc vous pouvez avoir mon assurance là-dessus et je pense que c'est une question importante qu'il faut garder vraiment sous attention. Signore Fiocchi, you put the question about the civilian use, the nuclear energy. At the agency, we believe nuclear energy is important, is playing a role in terms of climate change. Of course, we know that there are different views in Europe, but what I believe that is most important is that we have a common cause, which is the decarbonization of our economies. It's not the denuclearization of the world energy matrix. We, of course, respect the views of countries, and when you talk about the Energiewende in Germany, of course, it has a big impact. But if I have to, and with all due respect, if I have to look at the facts, nuclear energy in the world is growing. It's not decreasing. It's growing. Perhaps it could have grown much faster. There are those who talk about the nuclear renaissance that never happened. I don't know. We believe that nuclear energy is one of the actors that can play a compatible role with renewables and other sources of energy in this common task of having energy that we all need for the well-being of our societies, of you, me, and everybody else, and in particular in developing countries, and of course to do it in a way that does no harm to the environment. Of course, and you address this in your question as well. This requires very, very stringent safety standards and security guidance, and this is our work all the time. As I was referring to Belarus and in other parts of the world, I think it's very important, it's crucial that the IAEA plays its important, indispensable role in terms of ensuring that everything that is done in a safe and secure manner. Mr. Wallace, you were talking about whether Europe was playing a strong hand or not. I don't know, you also remember Diego Maradona, who had the hand of God, so that hand was there. But as of the hand of Europe, I believe Europe has a very important role to play. Europe has been at the forefront, I would say, of efforts in every technological area, including nuclear. And, in spite of these diverging views on the future of nuclear energy, there are still many who are important actors in this field. And don't forget, please, that when we talk about nuclear, it's not only about nuclear energy. There is all this work in nuclear medicine, in nuclear applications that is so important, where Europe has lots to do. You also said, because coming back to Iran, because US left, they should take the first step. You know, as you were referring to my homeland, I am also tempted to use a second analogy that has to do with my homeland, which has it that it takes two to tango. Yes, maybe the US first, or Iran, or whoever, they all have a responsibility. All of them, in different ways. And it is true that the United States withdrew first, but now there is an administration that says we want to come back. And we need to recognize one important factor. Even with the best of goodwill, there's a lot which happened in the past couple of years. There's a lot of material that has been accumulated by Iran. There are new capacities, technological capacities that they have accumulated, and they are honing their skills in these areas. So even if you had a magic wand or the hand of God, and you said, we go back tomorrow, well, there would be a lot of housekeeping, if I can put it like this, to do in order to make sure that when you go back, you have a clear idea of what is going on. So I'm talking to everybody and hope that everybody benefits from the impartial, neutral role that the IAEA can play in this regard. You also refer to the fact that we talk a lot about Iran, but we don't talk too much about Israel. And I don't want to hide from any subject. I think that Israel, as was the case of the countries that were mentioned before, the outliers of the NPT, have this characteristic. They decided not to join the non-proliferation order. And this, of course, limits our ability to work with them. You must know that we work with Israel. We perform safeguards, of course, in a very limited and narrow way, and not in the military facilities. So, of course, it's a highly political issue, but I wanted to mention it, for honesty's sake, because we have to address every issue. With us, there are no taboos. I hope these are clear answers to the questions, and I'm ready to take more if there are any other questions. Thank you very much, Madame la Présidente.
Merci beaucoup. Je passe maintenant aux coordonnateurs AFET en leur demandant la même concision que celle qu'observe l'ambassadeur Grossi. Et je passe d'abord la parole à Traian Basescu pour le PPE.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Ambassador Grossi, being with us today. Even if the nuclear agreement has not been denounced, it is clear that the international nuclear program is a major global concern. Iran must understand that no one democratic country can accept existence of Iranian nuclear weapons. The risk for the region and for the world peace will be far too high if the Iran will have nuclear weapons. Obstruction of agency inspections determined the United States to withdraw from the nuclear agreement with Iran. Accusing the United States sanctions and the EU's non-compliance, Iran started to increase enriched uranium production. Moreover, the Iranian parliament adopted a nuclear program that accelerated the production of enriched uranium, which completely takes Iran out of lines of commitment established by the nuclear agreement with the United States, European Union, China, and Russia. I personally believe that Iran has signed a temporary agreement with the agency just to gain time, but without being willing to comply with the terms of the nuclear agreement. From the point of view of the solutions regarding the risk of Iranian nuclear weapons, there are two. Namely, first, United States to be back on the nuclear agreement with Iran, and the second, negotiation of a much more ambitious new agreement, which will also take into account issues related to Iran's ballistic program.
Can you ask your question,
is a third
dear
solution
colleague?
Which nobody wants to discuss, military solution. Ambassador, you believe United States will be back on the existing nuclear agreement with Iran? Thank you, Madam President.
Merci. Je passe la parole pour les S&D à Josas Olekas.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Ambassador, thank you for the interesting presentation. And I would like to return back from Iran to Europe, particularly after you answer the question on Belarus. I have in mind Astrovets nuclear power plant, which is built only 60 kilometers from Lithuanian capital. You mentioned that there was no reason to stop this power plant, but how do you evaluate the fact that, as we all know, Belarus fulfilled only 7 out of 29. It means less than 1/3 of ESREG safety recommendation. But already in April or May, they are planning to start commercial use of power plant. As an example, with the car, a car would not pass the technical control if only 33% security measures are working. Everything from the engine and safe electrical installation to the safety belts and the air pillows are important if you want to have a safe exploitation of the car. Similar principles, I think, should be applied to the nuclear power station. Such rushed actions don't increase acceptability of nuclear power among the public. What is your evaluation? Thank you very much.
Merci. Pour Renew Europe, Clement Grossi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ambassador, I would have a question on the nuclear proliferation, because we are seeing some sort of nuclear renaissance going on in the civil use of nuclear energy, but at the same time we see a lot of more sinister events going on. I would just like to have a clear explanation and your view on what's the future and what is the destiny of the non-nuclear proliferation activities in the world, because we see that many more countries, even though they have a lot of civilian projects, they also try to obtain the nuclear weapons. What will be the agency's future policy on this issue, and how do you think how successful it can be in the ongoing major powers competition? Thank you.
Merci. Personne pour ID ni pour les Verts. Je passe la parole pour ECR à Anna Fotiga.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ambassador Grossi. Thank you very much indeed for your presence and your statement. I commend the IAEA role in promoting the peaceful use of nuclear power. All in particular in my favorite domain, nuclear medicine, but also for indicating many prospective areas of cooperation with the EU. Allow me to focus on Islamic Republic of Iran. I admit you have the right to test Iran's will to cooperate and to engage in diplomatic efforts. Although I must say, knowing overall activity and for many years of the Islamic Republic in many areas, including missile programs and human rights, financing terrorism, and so on, I'm very skeptical about the will to cooperate. The essence of any efforts to arms control, including nuclear arms control, is credible verification and monitoring. How do you assess the will of Iran to comply with international rules and to engage with us in future eventual broader agreement, including possibility for effective verification? What is time frame you give yourself to come to conclusions, including the board statement on Iran? And third, do you have any feedback from the Security Council, UN Security Council members on current developments with Iran? Thank you.
Merci. Je voudrais maintenant donner la parole à la présidente de la délégation pour les relations avec l'Iran, Cornelia Ernst.
Ja, vielen herzlichen Dank, dass ich die Gelegenheit habe, hier auch etwas zu sagen. Und vielen Dank, Herr Grossi. Es freut mich außerordentlich, dass Sie im Iran 2 gute Erfolge erstmal erzielt haben. Und wir können das als Parlament wirklich nur begrüßen, denn die Lage ist wirklich kompliziert. Sie haben das neue Gesetz im Iran angesprochen, die Anreicherung auf 20%. Und nach den Worten des iranischen Atomchefs Ali Akbar Salehi kann Iran den Grad seiner Urananreicherung bis auf 60% relativ rasch erhöhen. Und meine Frage richtet sich darauf, weil ja immer wieder argumentiert wird, der Iran ist zügig in der Lage, zu einer Atomwaffe zu kommen. Ist es möglich, in sehr kurzer Zeit nukleare Waffen im Iran herzustellen? Sehen Sie diese Gefahr tatsächlich in der Weise? Das Zweite ist, der Iran kooperiert mit der IAEA. Die Art der Zusammenarbeit ist ja auch immer ein Gradmesser für die Bereitschaft eines Staates, am NPT beizubehalten, dort zu verbleiben und nicht zu verbergen. Und Sie haben von minimaler Präsenz gesprochen, Ihrer Organisation im Iran. Können Sie das nochmal wirklich konkretisieren? Was heißt minimal und wie bewerten Sie generell die Atmosphäre der Zusammenarbeit seit 2015? Und das Dritte, es gibt immer wieder Berichte über Bestrebungen Saudi-Arabiens, ein Atomwaffenprogramm aufzulegen. Israel, Indien, Pakistan sind gar nicht das Mitglied des Vertrages über die Nichtweiterverbreitung von Kernwaffen. Und es gibt zugleich aber auch Initiativen zur Schaffung einer kernwaffenfreien Zone in der Region des erweiterten Nahen Osten schon seit vielen, vielen Jahren. Was sind Argumente, mit denen man tatsächlich nach vorn gewissermaßen argumentieren kann, dass wir von der Schaffung von Atomwaffen und entsprechenden Dingen tatsächlich abkehren können und die ganze Problematik Atomwaffen gerade aus dem erweiterten Nahen Osten tatsächlich herausbekommen? Vielen Dank.
Merci. Je vais maintenant donner la parole au directeur général de l'IAEA pour répondre à cette deuxième série de questions. Et il y en aura encore une troisième avec les coordonnateurs d'ITRE.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Pour la question de M. Basescu, you're asking me about the, apart from your political points, which are very interesting, thank you for sharing your thoughts with me, on the decision about the United States, I would say I see them back. This is what they tell me when I discuss with the Secretary of State and with the Iran envoy. This is what they're telling me, that they want to go back. But of course, as I was saying in the previous round of questions, there are a number of issues that still need to be clarified. So it's not impossible, it is difficult, but it's not impossible. Mr. Orekas, of course, not surprisingly, goes back to the issue of Belarus, and he refers to the geographic distance. As you know, the geographic distance between a nuclear power plant is not an impediment. What you need to do is to have a safe nuclear power plant. Like any other thing, you can have a chemical plant which is incredibly dangerous in the middle of a city, or any other industrial activity. What you need to have is a safety operation in there. You mentioned some recommendations. I can tell you that from our own peer reviews and also the interim report of ENSREG, which is a European mission, peer review mission, most of the issues that have been put to the Belarus operator are being addressed or have been satisfactorily addressed. We are still engaged in the process of talking to them to ensure that every important aspect is addressed. But as I said, the technical vision stands in the way I describe it. But you can be assured that we are going to continue to be engaged permanently. Mr. Clement was referring to, of course, the growth in nuclear energy may also bring other problems in terms of more nuclear material being there, more activity, and what to do to prevent non-proliferation. I think one important thing is that we have, first of all, a strong IAEA, because the IAEA is the eyes and ears of the international community at every nuclear power plant, making sure that nuclear material is not deviated to military purposes. This is the first thing you need to have. The watchdog needs to be there. And secondly, the watchdog can have bigger teeth, especially if there is a universal adherence to the additional protocol. I think it is very important that we all work together with all countries to make sure that all countries adhere to the additional protocol, which we have to be reminded that was added access and added competences in legal terms that were given to the IAEA inspectors after we learned the hard way in Iraq that with a minimalistic safeguards regime you may be nominally in good standing with your obligations, and then 5 blocks from that place you have an undeclared place where you are making nuclear bombs. So this is why it is so important, and I think Europe has been doing that, and you must continue to press for universal adherence to the additional protocol. Ms. Fotiga was referring to the credible, how to establish the credibility of Iran in this case and of any nation. It's a very difficult question, Madam, but all I can say is that by engaging and by being present, you have a technical way to determine that. Politically, you will never get it. Those who are friendly to Iran will say you have to trust Iran, and those who are very skeptical will never trust them. But if we have our inspectors there, then we will be able to have our judgment. And let me tell you that since I came to office, I have produced a record number of reports. Only in this year, 11 or 12 of what is going on. So every single thing that is relevant and happens is reported by me to the Board of Governors and through them to the international community. So the only way is inspect, inspect, inspect. You say what a time frame? The time frame is depending on what you're talking about. When you're talking about the JCPOA, you're talking about a multi-year effort that requires, and you remember, if you know or are familiar with the JCPOA, you will remember that the JCPOA had a number of sunset clauses, as they call them. It's not the legal term, let me tell you, but moments, sequences of times, 10 years for this, 15 years for that, 20 years for that. So they themselves, in their wisdom, it was not the IAEA, determined different time scales for the effort. So it will depend on how they do that. You also asked about the United Nations Security Council. I should say here we have a healthy division of labor. And they are dealing with the political consideration. I think they need our feedback because we are telling them what's going on, and they will decide politically what they want to do. Lastly, Frau Ernst, Ihre Frage über das neue Gesetz und was ist mit dieses neue Gesetz, dass diese Grenze bis Höhegraden vor Entreicherung von Uranium ist gesetzt. Ich denke, dass Atomwaffen zu entwickeln und zu machen ist anders als man braucht viel mehr als Uranium dafür zu machen. So, ich denke, es ist gefährlich. Man muss immer dabei sein. Wir probieren das zu machen. Wir mit der Unterstützung der internationalen Gesellschaft natürlich. Aber das ist alles, wie wir machen können. Für den NPT, wir hoffen natürlich, dass Iran da bleibt. Und das ist natürlich unser Ziel. Für Saudi-Arabien, ich denke, in meiner ersten Runde, ich habe Mr. Saturi etwas gesagt. Ich denke, dass wenn Saudi eine neue Dimension ihrem Atomprogramm machen will, dann wir werden eine ganz neues Maßnahmen und Dimension unserer einsetzen in Saudi-Arabien. Eine atomwaffenfreie Zone in der Nahost ist eine sehr, sehr schwierige politische Erreichung zu schaffen. Und ja, wir haben den Iran-Fall, Syrien und andere Dinge. Die Bedingungen sind im Moment nicht da. Vielen Dank.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général. Au tour maintenant des coordonnateurs d'ITRE, je commence par Massimiliano Salini pour le PPE.
Grazie Presidente, buongiorno, grazie mille Ambasciatore. Noi abbiamo alcuni punti di domanda di carattere industriale. Al primo lei ha dato delle risposte, riguarda l'impianto bielorusso. Il Parlamento europeo si è pronunciato in modo compatto sull'argomento durante l'ultima plenaria. La ringrazio per i chiarimenti. Sul tema energetico generale, come Commissione Industria non può non colpire il fatto che a fronte di un approvvigionamento energetico europeo che per il 17% si avvale dell'apporto dell'energia nucleare realizzato attraverso 128 centrali all'interno dell'Unione Europea e 56 all'esterno dell'Unione Europea, non può non colpire che dentro l'atto delegato sulla tassonomia, quindi sulla finanza sostenibile, la Commissione Europea non citi nemmeno l'energia nucleare. E questo è un punto di domanda che ci costringe anche oggi a chiedere a lei che cosa ne pensa. Lei ritiene dal suo punto di vista che la Commissione Europea dovrebbe modificare il proprio atteggiamento a riguardo? Vi è poi una seconda questione che invece ha più un carattere geopolitico ma non privo di impatti anche per noi come Commissione Industria. La fuoriuscita degli Stati Uniti dall'accordo sul nucleare iraniano nel 2018 ha prodotto come effetto più negativo, più da correggere, mi permetterei di dire, il fatto che all'Unione Europea nella relazione con gli Stati Uniti si sono sostituiti altri interlocutori su quello scacchiere. E questo ha generato conseguenze complicate, non li cito ma alcuni li ha già citati anche lei. Ecco, io rimango e noi rimaniamo convinti come Partito Popolare Europeo dell'importanza di un asse fortissimo tra Stati Uniti ed Unione Europea, soprattutto sullo scacchiere mediorientale con particolare riferimento all'accordo sul nucleare per l'Iran. E siamo convinti che non sia il tempo di verificare chi è stato più o meno trasparente, ma che sia il tempo di produrre fino alle sue estreme conseguenze quanto di meglio può essere prodotto attraverso quell'accordo. Tutti ne trarremmo vantaggio. Che azione state facendo a riguardo? Con particolare attenzione a questo punto, questo pilastro geopolitico, cioè l'asse Unione Europea-Stati Uniti sullo scacchiere mediorientale, in particolare sull'Iran. Grazie.
Merci. Pour les SND, Nicolás González Casares.
Gracias, embajador Grossi, por estar hoy aquí y quiero agradecer el trabajo que está realizando, especialmente en situaciones como la de Irán. Yo voy a hablar de energía y desde el punto de vista energético y climático, la energía nuclear está jugando un papel importante en proveernos de electricidad descarbonizada, pero está claro que la situación no está para desechar medidas que ayuden a descarbonizar la economía. La Unión Europea se ha comprometido con alcanzar la neutralidad climática en el año 2050 y esto conlleva una fuerte electrificación y demanda de electricidad sin CO2. Sin embargo, los problemas asociados a los residuos nucleares y, sobre todo, el salto competitivo de energías renovables como la eólica o la solar está cuestionando la apuesta por esta fuente. Como legisladores, nuestra preocupación es promover adecuadamente las tecnologías más coste eficientes y lo cierto, dicen las estadísticas, que la nuclear está en retroceso. Tampoco ayudan los accidentes ocurridos. Confío en la seguridad técnica de las plantas cuando se siguen los procedimientos técnicos y hay transparencia. Y agradezco el trabajo que hace la agencia en este sentido. Pero hace 10 años tuvimos el accidente de Fukushima, un duro golpe a la confianza internacional en la energía nuclear y como consecuencia se establecieron nuevas medidas de seguridad. Por otro lado, vemos la investigación e innovación avanzando, por ejemplo, con la apuesta de los pequeños reactores modulares o la reutilización de los residuos radiactivos. Teniendo en cuenta lo anterior, 3 preguntas. ¿Qué retos y posibilidades ve la energía nuclear para afrontar los desafíos energéticos del cambio climático? ¿Cómo ve su competitividad económica frente a nuevas energías. ¿Qué papel jugará la nuclear en el impulso al hidrógeno que se está produciendo? Y por último, otra cuestión, ha anunciado que están preparando participar en la COP26. ¿Van a presentar alguna medida concreta que nos pueda adelantar? Gracias.
Merci pour Renew Europe, Mauri Pekarinen.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Director General. 12 weeks ago, in the IAEA Beijing Ministerial Conference, I reminded the participants that management and disposal of spent nuclear waste has not been organized in proper manner across the globe. The state of play has not improved so much. I dare to say that in Finland we are doing very well in this regard. First ever in the world, deep geological repository for spent nuclear fuel, Onkalo, is almost ready and its operating license is on its way. I recall that you recently visited the site. Now I would like to ask if there are new measures at the IAEA which promote or even oblige all nuclear power using states to properly take care of nuclear waste management and disposal. There are about 440 nuclear power plants globally. For the acceptability and safety of nuclear energy, I think this is a matter of great importance. Thank you very much.
Merci. Toujours personne pour idée. Je passe maintenant la parole pour les Verts à Bronis Ropé.
Gerbiama pirmininkė, ačiū gerbiamam ambasadoriui Grosui. Iš tikrųjų, klausimas labai svarbus ir labai svarbus, kada mes pradedam žaliąjį kursą, klimato programas. Tai noriu pasakyti, kad yra visiška melgiena arba visiškas fake newsas, kad atominė energetika yra pigi, švari ir saugi. Ir tikrai noriu paklausti, ar moralu, sąžininga užkrauti ne tik šimtams, tūkstančiams metų ateities kartoms, reiškia, problemą atliekų tvarkymo. Nereiktų nustatyti termino, pavyzdžiui, 10, 15 ar 20 metų atliekų sutvarkymą. Tada būtų įtraukta visos išlaidos į kainą ir atominė energetika, atominės elektrinės taptų nekonkurencingas ir niekas jų nebestatytų. Šiandieną kainoje nėra įtraukta uždarimo kaštų arba jie įtraukiami 100 metų, tai tada tokiu atveju ta energija ir yra pigi. Ir ar jūs manote teisinga atliekų tvarkymas yra užkasti po žemę? Ar tai konteinerė, ar tai žemės ertmėj, tai juk netvarkymas turi būti sutvarkyta taip, kad nereiktų atidėti, reiškia, atliekų, o ne užkasti po žemę, ir ateities kartos gali atsikasti ir žiūrėti. Kitas klausimas labai trumpas, noriu pasakyti, ką jūs darysit, jeigu Lukašenka turėdamas atidirbto kūro pradės jį sodrinti? Jūs veiksit? Ar vėl taip žiūrėsit, kaip dabar statoma elektrinė su pažeidimais ir tų pažeidimų nesiruošia likviduoti, o nori toliau eksploatuoti? Ar bus kokie nors veiksmai priimami? Ir trečias dalykas, man labai norėtųsi žinoti, kas yra daroma su atidirbto kūro panaudojimu, nes jo kiekiai yra didžiuliai ir toliau didėja. Kur jį galima būtų panaudoti, kad jo nebūtų kaupiamas, tai yra pavojinga atlieka, kuri 1000 metų yra užteršiama. Ta aš žinau puikiausiai pavyzdį iš Ignalinos atominės elektrinės. Ačiū.
Merci. Et je passe maintenant la parole à l'ambassadeur Grossi pour répondre à cette dernière série de questions.
Merci, merci Madame la Presidente. Dunque, il signor Salini ha parlato di due o tre cose, ma un'idea che mi sembra importantissima, è l'atto delegato sulla tassonomia. Per noi qui all'Agenzia è importante, noi non abbiamo un ruolo a giocare in questo processo, ma per me personalmente, per l'Agenzia è importante di aver bisogno un lavoro tecnicamente neutrale. Dunque, tutte tecnologie devi essere analizzata, devi essere evaluata su una prospettiva neutrale e dunque in questo momento, in questo modo abbiamo questa sfida del cambiamento climatico e in questo processo la non inclusione dell'energia nucleare sarebbe ideologica se non si basa su un aspetto puramente tecnico. Sulla la questione anche importante dell'azione sull'asse americano-europeo, io penso così che questa unità, questa coerenza nell'attitudine politica di questi due attori principalissimi sarebbe essenziale. Io come direttore generale gioco un ruolo marginale sulla questione politica, ma ho un dialogo veramente profondo, un dialogo sistematico con tutti e due e penso di aiutare in questo processo perché come lei dice giustamente quando c'è una coerenza nell'azione politica in questo asse si va davanti, se no è difficile. Il signor González Casares hace referencia al tema de los residuos nucleares, que también surge en la cuestión importante del señor Bronis Rope hace un momento y también del señor Mauri Pekkarinen. Creo que el tema del tratamiento de los residuos nucleares ha tenido un desarrollo muy importante con la puesta en línea del repositorio geológico de alta profundidad en Onkalo. Mr. Pekkarinen, I'm referring to your country and to Onkalo, where I was last November. Y pienso que lo que ahí ha sucedido, si bien tecnológicamente no es una novedad, porque todos sabíamos que existía esta tecnología, the fact that we have now a place there that is actually in place makes a whole lot of a difference. I think we can have many plans on paper, but once you see it is doable, it's been done, then the perspectives change. Y sabemos que no es el único caso, porque tenemos también el caso de Suecia, en Forsmark, que dentro de poco también estará trabajando en la misma orientación. El señor González Casares también habla de las nuevas generaciones y de las nuevas tecnologías. New modular small and medium-sized reactors are indeed incredibly promising. And what I can see, I can tell you, I can share with you that as Director General, I receive ministers of energy from all over the world, and in particular from many developing countries. Y sabe usted que todos ellos lo que están esperando son estos reactores. Preguntan constantemente cuándo será el momento en que estos reactores estén activos, y tenemos algunos reactores ya en fabricación en Rusia, en China, existen proyectos en Europa que espero sean desarrollados. En mi propio país, en la Argentina, hay uno en construcción, de modo tal que todo esto tiene mucho que ver también con la otra cuestión que usted suscitaba, que es la cuestión de la competitividad de la industria nuclear. Evidentemente, cuando el coste energético es una ciencia sumamente inexacta y en la cual yo personalmente he visto que la solución generalmente depende de la posición ideológica del que está hablando. Entonces, cuando hacemos un análisis del coste energético, very usually we see that people integrate or take out of the equation things that accommodate a previously held vision about it. If you have, if you integrate into the nuclear equation the stability, the long-term operation, the many other factors, and you take out subsidies that may be at the moment channeled to other sources of energy, then your picture changes dramatically. So I believe that nuclear energy tiene un futuro muy claro, tiene un futuro indudable, y los países en su sabiduría decidirán hasta qué punto la utilizan. Usted también mencionaba la cuestión de la producción de hidrógeno y creo que es conocido que los reactores nucleares pueden dar este servicio junto con otros, por ejemplo, calefacción distrital, desalinización de aguas, además de producir energía. Por lo tanto, la COP26 es muy importante. La COP26 va a ser mi segunda COP. En realidad, la primera a la cual asistí fue en Madrid, donde noté una cosa, y es que existía un gran interés por escuchar al sector nuclear que nunca había estado presente, por lo menos al nivel de un director general. Y ahí lo que vamos a tratar de hacer es una presentación, no tenemos ninguna medida en particular, porque como usted sabe, no somos un participante de la COP26 como país, por lo tanto no tenemos un rol específico en esas negociaciones, pero sí vamos a estar muy presentes y con la Agencia Internacional de Energía de la OCDE, con la cual trabajamos muy estrechamente porque ellos sí que hacen estudios de costes muy interesantes y estamos trabajando con ellos en la presentación en general. Mr. Pekarinen was raising the issue of nuclear waste. I hope in my answer to Mr. González Casares I have touched upon this matter. I have the pleasure to be present in Oncalo and I myself term this as a game changer. Again, not because the technology was not known, but because it is a tangible proof that one can do this. Mr. Rope raises this issue of the next generations and the amount of nuclear waste. I think here, again, a very important issue, and thank you very much, Mr. Rope, for raising this issue. Let me say a couple of things. First of all, the fact that we bury and we forget and others need to deal with this problem is perhaps not a very accurate way to put the question. The thing is done in a way that can be sustainable for not hundreds, thousands of years. Compatible with the decrease in the radioactive activity of those fuels which are there. So it's not like we are putting something there and in 30 years down the line your son or grandson or mine are going to find a glowing piece of earth and not know what is going to happen. I think there is a lot of misinformation about this. And the same applies, if I can say it, to the amounts of fuel. Frankly speaking, I'm surprised. The amounts of nuclear fuel are incredibly small. Do you know, for example, that the whole amount of spent fuel, not in Europe, in the United States, for 70 years, you can put it in a football stadium, the whole amount. So now let's compare that with waste from coal, with waste for any other source of energy. So I believe that here, representing a technical agency as I do, we always enjoy and promote and foster a technical debate. Of course, nuclear waste is a very serious matter, which cannot be, to use the analogy, it cannot be, swept under the rug. Or buried in an irresponsible way. When one does these things, they are done in a technically sound manner, which is compatible with sustainable economic growth. And I believe that this is the way forward. Of course, we at the IAEA are open to share the information we have, to share the knowledge that we have, the experience that we have, which is based on the analysis of the waste situation all over the world. But of course, it's a dialogue that we can continue anytime, and all the points have been incredibly useful. So, Madame la Présidente, c'est à vous, j'espère avoir répondu d'une manière acceptable aux questions qui m'ont été posées.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général. Acceptable ne me semble pas le bon qualificatif. Je dirais que notre session de ce matin a été exemplaire à beaucoup d'égards. D'abord parce que nous finissons presque à l'heure. Alors, tout est dans le presque et je remercie une fois de plus nos interprètes de nous accorder quelques minutes supplémentaires. Mais tout de même, vu le nombre des sujets que nous avons couverts, j'en remercie notre invité et tous les collègues qui ont bien voulu tenir leur temps de parole. Exemplaire aussi parce qu'on a entendu une grande variété de langues, et notamment grâce au directeur général dont le multilinguisme est à saluer. Mais enfin, nous n'avons pas parlé seulement globish dans cette salle, et je m'en réjouis que le multilinguisme puisse s'affirmer davantage au Parlement européen. Exemplaire parce que 3 commissions parlementaires ont travaillé ensemble pour cette rencontre. Ça nous a évité de réfléchir en silo sans savoir les préoccupations des autres, et je crois que sur un sujet de ce type, c'est particulièrement important. Nous avons vu le nombre des questions de nos collègues, mais surtout, je voulais saluer la clarté, la précision, l'engagement et la transparence des réponses de l'ambassadeur Grossi. Nous vous avons soumis, Monsieur le Directeur Général, à un marathon et vous l'avez remporté brillamment. Le nucléaire est un sujet majeur, la non-prolifération un enjeu essentiel. Nous poursuivrons donc, en ce qui concerne la sous-commission sécurité et défense, le dialogue avec vous, Monsieur le Directeur Général, et avec votre agence. Et je voudrais conclure en vous renouvelant, et là aussi c'est exemplaire, le soutien, je crois, unanime de tous les députés européens qui se sont exprimés à votre action. Merci encore. Et pour ce qui est de la sous-commission sécurité et défense, nous nous retrouverons tout à l'heure à 13h45.